Okay, the panel coming up, as I mentioned, is going to be moderated by Andrew Bashford from Westpac, and on that panel is going to be Rotorua Mayor Steve Chadwick, Dr Oliver Hartwich, who is already in the chair on the concept of localism, and Stephen Selwood, the Chief Executive of Infrastructure New Zealand. So I'll hand over to Andrew.
So we'll just check that these microphones are all working, but first of all I'd like to welcome Her Worship, the Mayor. Thank you very much for joining us on this panel. So, I mean, that's been a fascinating conversation too, quite, well, I'd say challenging and profound discussions around future models. Your Mayor, I might just start with you around, because we've got some theory around models that could work. You're living the reality. Obviously, you're involved in local government as the Mayor, but you've also got a background as a Minister. So how do you see it?
Well, I enjoy sitting between these two, actually, because they're paradigms of extremes, but actually we're all saying the same thing about needing a transformational agenda that we all buy into. And then I really liked hearing the Manchester model this morning, because that resonated with me about putting people at the centre and also saying centralisation doesn't work. It doesn't work for local government. We're sort of facing quite a bombardment of regulatory reform that could overwhelm capacity, and we're a medium-sized council with capability to respond, but I dread to think how small councils who really matter could ever cope with that coming down the pipeline, as they say, especially with the Three Waters. I like the localism model. I think localism is built on strong leadership, a high trust model with central government, and actually we are being listened to more than we've ever been before. And I think that churn of ideas is a really good thing that's going on. But it's having a plan locally. And then how does that convert into a sort of city deal that I would rather take to the wider region when there's a convincing proposition that is unique within that city deal, or whatever you're going to call it, to the wider region. Because regions aren't about lines on a map, and we're sick of that. We've spent far too much money actually fighting amalgamations rather than working on the unique propositions to us locally that really matter, with people closest to where decisions are made having that participation, and then working with central government as a partner about, have we got the deal for you? Now help us make that happen. So it's a little bit of what you were proposing, Stephen. I'm glad you're in there. I can hear some great discussions with the Commission, but for us locally, we have been fighting for a long time that localism matters. And I think you touched, Oliver, on something that is deeply concerning when I see those districts that have had a mayor put in unopposed. People aren't very inspired by what we're doing at a local level. So to make localism relevant is our biggest challenge. And it's to stop the old arguments that rates are too high and debt's out of control and you must stop this crazy investment and growth. But it's telling a new story, and it's a new story about where investment is going to add to the quality of life in our environment locally.
So just a follow-up question. When we spoke the other day, you mentioned a couple of really great examples where there has been collaboration, which have delivered amazing local outcomes for Rotorua.
And I think you wouldn't forget it, and I like hearing Oliver talk about the role of iwi. There are two major water schemes that we've managed to resolve here after years and years of fighting and going to the Environment Court. And we've actually solved it by working locally with iwi about their aspirations, and found that underlying it was a sort of arrogance about the way council dealt with them in the past. And they lost trust and they lost confidence, And when we reformed around a partnership with the tribe, they came with their aspirations. And we were able to go to central government and say, we need this land issue resolved, we need some investment money, that's the incentives that you're talking about, and we've now protected their source of water for our district, and we've also built a wastewater treatment plant with incentives from Ministry for the Environment and Ministry for Health. Without that, and Regional Council giving some money, we'd have never, ever, ever got there. So I think working locally is the way to do it, but then the challenge for us is about how do we join it up? How do we join it up? And I think that is the inspiration about Manchester. And it needs to be an entity that is external to us with great expertise. And it might be the Commission that we go and think, we've got this really cool idea. We've got buy-in from 6 mayors in the region. Can you walk with us to help prepare this as an investment-rich proposition for us to take to government?
So it seems all of you have mentioned that in order to transform, we need this political mandate. I might start with you, Stephen, and then just go along. So how do we create the momentum for that will deliver a political mandate?
Yeah, well, I start with the first thing you've got to have is a sense of aspiration, and I'm not sure that we actually have that in New Zealand. We're actually all, I think, pretty comfortable as New Zealanders. Life is pretty sweet. But I guess what motivates me in this conversation is we're a nation of 5 million people with the 6th highest natural resource reserve in the world. Surely we can bring our act together in a much more cohesive way to bring prosperity rather than the sort of tangle of complexity that we're in at the moment. So I think the first point is you've got to start with a national aspiration. And look, whether that comes from the bottom up or the top down, frankly, it doesn't matter, but it's got to start. So, and I actually really like the conversation that's going on in local government about localism. I guess what I was seeking to do in my talk was to say, well, how do we actually get there? You know, what do we actually have to do to give effect to that kind of thinking? And to me, either collaboration is going to have to happen naturally from the bottom up, and I'm not seeing a lot of evidence of that happening. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's some good things happening out there, and Steve, your example locally is a classic example of it, but not at a sort of aspirational level that I'm talking about. So this is where I think Oliver's proposals and conversation about we need an incentive there. The government has already come up with the Provincial Growth Fund. What a conceptually great idea it was. Not 100% sure that the implementation has been optimum, but maybe if we could extend the concept to a regional growth fund, and it does incentivise the sort of collaboration that is necessary to really seriously think about how a region might grow and develop, then I think that's the way forward. Now, whether or not structural change might result out of that kind of doesn't matter, because the structure is only there to help you achieve your objectives. So if it can be achieved without structural change, then fantastic. But it seems to me to make a lot more sense if we had maybe some fewer voices, because you've got to build agreement here, and you also need, whilst localism is important, you also need scale. And we heard in the city deals, the size of balance sheets enables a level of investment that simply can't occur when your population is 3,500 people and you're reliant on a cost allocation rates method to fund the growth of your district. I mean, it's just incompatible. So the speech today was to try and rattle the cage a little bit and say, we can do this, we've got to have the aspiration, but we need to move beyond the discussion to the doing.
And Oliver, your thoughts?
Well, I think it takes an opposition. It would always take an opposition to get us towards localism, and it doesn't matter which opposition. It doesn't matter whether it's national or Labour. National is in parts the part of local government. They are very strong at the local level with their candidates and councillors. Labour is philosophically at least committed to decentralization. So I think either of the two parties could theoretically do it, but they need to do that work in opposition. It is not possible to suddenly discover your localist instincts once you're the minister, because then it's too late. Once you're the minister, you will see every problem as yours, and you will intervene and you will try to fix it. What we actually need is an opposition, no matter which party, to actually develop a localist philosophy in many years in opposition and to develop a clear philosophical framework that that's where they want to be. Because once they enter government, as I said, it's too late, and once they enter government, what I actually want to see is a minister who devolves stuff, goes into parliament, and then when challenged on issues that they don't work locally because they've just been devolved, and can you please do something about it, say, well, look, not my problem. We've just devolved it. I told you this is how localism works, and don't even challenge me on this in parliament anymore. That's it. We constantly have this temptation in parliament with two centralist parties to really challenge each other on problems that are not really their making. So I think it takes a lot of courage. It is not easy to do. It is not the natural thing. The natural thing is to centralize. But that's why I think we need to have a conversation with whoever is the opposition of the day, because in government this thinking will not happen.
I think there needs to be an element of urgency.
Yes.
I see that. I feel it, and young people are demanding it. So the participation that's most exciting is young people now sort of coming to say, what are you doing? And that is urgency for New Zealand. That's why I don't quite like the regional approach. I think New Zealand's so small, we should be able to sort it out nationally.
Well, that was going to be my next question. I mean, this debate, if you compare us to Switzerland and Germany and big countries, you know, we're a country of 4 million, reasonably parochial. Can it practically work in New Zealand?
Yeah, why not? I mean, New Zealanders are not genetically more stupid than the Swiss. So, of course, we can do all sorts of things in New Zealand. Why should we be unable to do it? So, and by the way, Switzerland is not a big country either. Switzerland is the size geographically of Canterbury, really, with 8 million people. But actually, we took our members to Denmark recently and to Sweden, and Denmark is a country of 5.7 million people. It's not huge, but in Denmark, it's 60% local government spending and 40% for the national government. In Denmark, they have devolved all sorts of things, and they do it, and they think that's natural. Why can the Danes do it? I mean, why shouldn't we be able to do it? Of course we can.
Do you think, again, for all of you, do you believe we've got the competency to be able to manage these issues at a local level?
I think that will have to build over time. And, you know, we have to understand that this is going to be an evolving kind of development, not overnight we'll just change all the structures and blah, blah. It's going to all work perfectly, because it doesn't. I guess to a certain extent we've seen that a little bit in Auckland. So the consolidation of the council in Auckland, I argue, has been transformational for Auckland in terms of its ability to think strategically, bring a large balance sheet to the table, and operate at a level that previously wasn't possible. But we equally know that the capability gaps were there in Auckland, and it has taken a long time for the kind of cultural shift to be made. But I do think that does provide us an example and I guess a confidence that we can actually do this. So to me, the reason I favour the regional kind of component is that the kind of local as we have it at the moment is too small. The central kind of control is you just don't understand local issues, you don't understand local people, and you're not close enough to the coalface when you're in central government to live and breathe the actual issues. So regions to me seem to be a logical sort of compromise between that. And the other thing too, in local government, you know, we have some of the, with due respect to Steve, and I know that you've built up expertise, but we have the least experienced people managing infrastructure. I would say that function should go to infrastructure utility kind of organisations, and we've seen exemplars like Watercare and Wellington Water, what transformation can be achieved. But what local government should be about is the people, the communities, the things that really make a community, the local amenities, the placemaking. And if we could kind of get the best of all worlds, where we have very strong local voice and representation on the things that matter to people and improving social cohesion, but then have the scale where it matters in infrastructure delivery, spatial planning, and delivery in partnership with government, so all levels work in synchronisation. How hard is that? I mean, it should not be that hard. 5 million people.
So Mayor Chadwick, I know you've got quite strong views about this, so where do you think
Look,
the boundaries?
I am a bit worried about democracy, actually. I think 4-year cycles for central government and local government are fundamental to start working on pretty quickly, because we spend 1 year with our great plan and getting the capability sorted around it, 1 year of delivery, and then 1 year of falling apart. And that's just stupid for New Zealand. And it's the same in central government. I experienced it there. You come in, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, you set up some wonderful ideas, and then your delivery is so severely curtailed. So I like the 30-year infrastructure plan. I like your long-term investment strategy. And I think we need to pick up those notions that work, but locally start to drive them. The capabilities there in every community. And if it's not in tiny communities, we've got capacity to go and walk beside them on their journey as well. And that's the strength of local government New Zealand, with the expertise that's there. But I don't like the bottom-down approach at all. And I think, trust us, we can have some devolution and manage it better than what I see happening at the moment. If I look at roading, for example, it's one of the biggest blockers for us at the moment. And I heard the Minister say that it's going to be sorted out. Well, it needs to be very quickly, because where there are national roads that are of really importance for us for connectivity, we've got some nonsense going on, because a GPS, a general policy statement, said we're going to change the priorities. We can't argue with that priority, and it's their right to do it. But suddenly, I have to say, we feel it's a bit crude, but it's like coitus interruptus, where 2/3 of the way through a fully developed plan and the funding stops and it gets diverted away. And it's very frustrating. And for us locally, we've got one road, only one road, but it connects us to Tauranga and to the port and makes it faster for getting our logs to export, and that's very important. Food, all of that to communities. And there's a 180 housing unit development there, and it's blocked. Until that investment goes in that road, we can't do anything. Every minister knows about it, and I know they're trying to correct, the funding plan, but those things should be very simply sorted out.
So look, I'm just going to ask one more question and then ask some questions from the floor, but I might just slightly pivot. All of you have talked about the importance of clarity of outcomes, and there's the new 4 capitals and the wellbeing framework, the importance of incentives and funding tools. What would you really like to see in that regard? So maybe I'll start with you, Oliver.
Incentives. I would start with incentives, because that will fix a lot of the problems that we currently observe. It will also fix the perceived competence issue, because I agree with Steve, we have incredibly competent people working in local government. It is not as if the people in local government didn't know what they were doing, but they are not incentivized properly. If you know that when it comes to development, you are required to spend on infrastructure, you're required to spend endless time dealing with NIMBYs, with people who simply don't want to have any development in the neighborhood, why would any rational person then say, hey, let's go for growth, let's try to make some local growth happen? You would have to be stupid to do that, almost, or very idealistic, at least. So I think you're doing a great job, but you're not actually rewarded for it. So we have to fix the incentives. We have to make sure that when it comes to development, local government keeps a share of it. Whether it's a share of GST, a share of corporate taxes, a share of income taxes, frankly, I couldn't care less, as long as they keep some of it. And then you will see a completely different kind of behavior. You will see the behavior that is directed towards growth. You will also probably see that you attract even more talent into local government, because once you actually give local government say over their own affairs, you will see that it becomes an ambitious thing suddenly to run for council. And you wouldn't have 6 councils where mayors get elected unopposed, because it will suddenly become something that is ambitious to run for council, to run for mayor, and then to implement policies, because you can also see that whatever you're achieving, you will see the results in your pocket and you will be rewarded for that. So it will become something really aspirational, local government, and currently I don't think we're there. So I think if you really want to fix local government in one word, incentivize it.
I would absolutely agree, and I think the Commission could really look at this. I don't want to use international funding to help us. I'd rather use New Zealand funding. So whatever the banks are looking at, there should be some sort of fund that we can go to if our investment proposition stacks up, that we can no longer squeeze our lemon locally. And every council around New Zealand would say that. So I think that's very exciting to have the Infrastructure Commission. I think if they look at, we're looking at a limited purpose vehicle. 70% of what we do here now is run by council-controlled organisations. So we have been devolving out to some very skilled people. But if we were able to then go, doesn't have to be government, but to an entity with a business case, that could be very compelling. And you look at the investment tools with banks and that we could do with KiwiSaver and other great mechanisms that we've set up, that would be hugely helpful to us.
Stephen?
Yeah, I think clearly we have to, I agree totally with the incentives for obvious reasons, but clearly we also need to do something with the rate system. It's a cost allocation method. Why not just make it a percentage of value of property, and when they go up, then kind of the income goes up. That's a direct incentive in its own right. And user charges. If you look at the infrastructure sectors that actually operate reasonably well, and I would say it's telecommunications and the energy sector, they're not perfect, but what they have is a straight relationship between the supply utility and the customer charging a price for a service. The politics and the taxes are not even in the equation, and you have a much easier service delivery arrangement. So, why aren't we charging volumetrically for water? Because right now we're building wastewater and potable water treatment plants while people waste the precious commodity. So we've got to get our pricing systems right as well. The combination of all those three could be quite compelling.
Just quickly on the rate system, I think that's probably one of the areas in which we disagree. I think rates are not a good way of financing local government, because
I agree with that, actually.
Because rates will always be collected no matter whether the council is doing a good job or not. I live in Wellington. I pay my rates to Wellington City Council. If I thought Wellington City Council was not doing a good enough job for me and I moved to somewhere else, Wellington City Council would still collect the rate on my house. So it doesn't matter whether they're doing a good job or not a good job. They will always collect that rate from someone, whether it's me or someone who bought my house. There's no dynamic incentive in the rate system. We need to have something that actually gives councils an extra, a bonus when they do things right, and also punishes them for when they're not doing a good job.
But if you made it a straight percentage on the value of properties, if they're doing things right,
no, that doesn't actually fix it, because if you just make it a percentage of the value of property, the incentive is to increase the value by simply not building anything anymore. No.
Oh, that is a risk.
You have to take something from income tax generated, because otherwise you will never have a dynamic incentive in New Zealand. And I think that's the crux of the argument. That's what we are not getting right. And that's where countries like Germany and Switzerland have it right, because their councils actually have an access to something that's generated dynamically.
Yeah, I agree.
So we'll try and create a bit of, sorry, Amir?
I want to mention too, I hear a bit about the Provincial Growth Fund.
Yes.
I want to say, because we were very nimble to get plans in, and our proposals, and by golly, I was impressed with the level of scrutiny that went backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards before it was signed off. So I don't see it. I know I heard Shane say it's like fairy dusty sprinkling around. I think it could be more strategically directed, especially in infrastructure that might enable regional and district growth. So that might be the next iteration of it. But I was very impressed at how we were put under the headlights.
And you've received, I think Shane Jones mentioned 40
47 million.
47 million.
And there's more in the pipeline.
So look, from the floor, the question that's got the most votes so far is, how do we capture the benefits of localism while also benefiting from standardising things like procurement, school designs, and other infrastructure?
Well, to me, that's where the scale conversation does come in, the ability to have capability at a much more macro level. I mean, the appointment of the Commission is a powerful step because one of its key functions will be to provide project delivery support to districts, councils, regions or agencies to deliver and procure effectively. So I think that's the advantage of having a central pool of capability that can then partner locally to transfer and hopefully inculcate those skills as they move from project to project. So that's where specialisation and localism can complement one another, I think.
Any thoughts on that?
I think we started some time ago looking at our wastewater here, and we've gone out to market and the international market, and we've got a preferred provider. And after this election, we'll go back to the community saying, are you comfortable with this? And then we'll enact it. And I think that's it's our way, it's the sort of Rotorua way, but others will see that it's got the capability to scale up, and so they could come in as well. We tried thinking of it regionally, but others weren't very interested in a water board, and it was like, no, who's going to run this? And we got, it went off the rail, so we did it our own way. The community actually bought into it when we went out to them and said, that's quite sensible. So they'll have a lease for 25 years and we'll make the decisions closest to the communities about source point water, and they'll operate, maintain. So a very strong statement of intent, and I think that's where, when you get a bit of success, then others will say, this isn't a bad idea, let's explore it and come into it. But we looked at Watercare, we looked at what Waikato's doing and looked at Wellington, but this was the way that worked for us.
So look, this next question links into the comment you made, Oliver, about participation. Probably the words are slightly different to what I would use, but can localism work in New Zealand with a politically apathetic population?
Well, that's more a general comment about New Zealand, and then you might ask, can democracy work at the national level? And I think actually this is where we learn democracy at the local level. Democracy is typically learned closer to home. You cannot learn democracy in the abstract. And if you read, going really back into history now, Alexis de Tocqueville, Democracy in America, as the kind of classic starting point. De Tocqueville was really impressed by how small communities organize their own affairs, and he actually said what local government is to democracy is it's basically the primary school to democracy, because that's where you learn it. So I think if whoever asked that question has a concern about New Zealanders not being able to make democratically valid decisions, that is then a national problem. But I think the best way to fix it is actually to let people participate in their own affairs and scale it up from there.
Do you agree with that, Nia? I mean,
I absolutely do. I'm quite heartened by young voices, actually. And that happens locally. If they get onto council, then they'll learn about governance, and then they'll learn about what success looks like, and I think they'll go on to other fields as well. But you've got to believe in it. It's the tool that we've got. It's where I cut my teeth, school board of trustees, and then away I went, from there, and learned every step of the journey. So you've got to believe in it.
So this question is directed to you, Stephen. So why would a future legislative model not combine 3 current frameworks into one, not 2, to avoid the conflicting processes which mar delivery now?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was kind of the ambition for the RMA, in fact, that you would have a sort of conversation more holistically about environmental, economic and social kind of outcomes, but it ended up in a trade-off. And I think having a separate statute for environment appropriately establishes that as the fundamental bottom line, So the purpose of the Environment Act would be to set bottom lines, and indeed, as I said in my speech, hopefully to improve freshwater quality or biodiversity over time. But those are, I mean, that is our natural asset, it's our natural heritage. It's what we New Zealanders treasure as part of our national identity. And I think from that point of view, we want to hold that sacrosanct. Within our natural and environmental limits, then we can develop and grow, which is what all of the development side of the legislative structure that we proposed is all about. I think it adds clarity and certainty. And I think that's important for the investment community, because right now, if you go into an RMA consent process, you just do not know what the bottom lines are and where things are going to eventually come out at. So yeah, that's the rationale for the division.
Okay. So just thinking about Shane Jones's comments this morning about the Uber authority as he describes it, I mean, what do you think's good about that, or the potential risks about that? Maybe to start with you, Stephen.
By Uber authority?
Well, the Unified Infrastructure Commission.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think we need to understand that the Commission is an influencing and advisory body. Its power is through tabling its recommendations to Parliament, to which the government must respond, and opposition scrutiny of the government's response will effectively be the accountability, as will the media and public opinion. So the Commission, we have to understand, has no powers in its own right, other than the sheer, hopefully, grunt and intellect and objective approach that it takes to giving the very best advice that it can achieve. But I do think it's an important step from a leadership point of view, and we haven't really had a discussion around kind of long-term infrastructure planning, or indeed what our national plan as a country is about, and I think that will be one of the first challenges that the Commission will come across. Well, what is our plan, government? Give us some clear direction about actually what you want to achieve. We understand well-being, but what does that mean in terms of a operable, deliverable plan, and then how does infrastructure enable that? And when, our delegations to Asia this year was a classic example where China, Singapore and Hong Kong were investing in infrastructure because it was the physical platform for social and economic development of their countries. And that's where we've got to position infrastructure in New Zealand as the platform for prosperity. That's the role of the Commission.
So look, we've got a couple of minutes left. I think I like the question earlier about if you were in the lift with, Jacinda, what would be your 2 or 3 sort of key messages for her? So, Oliver.
If you want to fix the housing market, the best way to do that is to give councils, maybe for a limited time initially, the GST on new development. So when houses are built, the GST that is generated by that building process should stay with councils. No ifs, no buts, because actually what it takes away also is the kind of discretion that we currently see, for example, from the Provincial Growth Fund, where you have to back central government for money. It would make it automatic. And so imagine the mindset change you would get out of that. If Phil Goff, if he's still mayor after the election, knew that for the next 3 or 5 years he would keep all the GST from new development, he would consent with his ears pinned back. He would just really consent and consent and consent, because he would also have a good argument. He could tell Aucklanders there's something in it for you. We are not just putting more cars on the roads in Auckland. We're not just creating more competition for public services in Auckland. We're not just driving up house prices. Actually, we might be doing the opposite. We are actually getting more money into the council, and we can deliver better public services for you. So he would turn this very uncomfortable story of how to manage growth into something, how to share the proceeds of growth. So if I had 30 seconds with Jacinda in the lift, I would say just give Phil Goff the GST, make this a general principle, and see what happens to the housing market. I predict you will solve this housing crisis within 5 years.
Mayor Chadwick.
Well, I've been in the lift with Jacinda, but I actually think it is the devolution of which aspects of governance we could manage locally. There are some things that we could do so much better. Devolution, when we last brought it up with a government, We had a go here in Rotorua, and Treasury got the wrong end of the stick and thought we were wanting most aspects of central government devolved to Rotorua, and we were trying to solve youth into employment and jobs and a career, our needs. We knew we could do it better locally than was being done nationally. But it was, I remember a conversation with another leader in a lift, and he said, why do you want it all devolved to you? And I said, that's not what we ever proposed. So sometimes we don't have these conversations about what are rich opportunities for locally led devolution models, and then how you can scale those up. So I would love a conversation about what more could be decentralised.
Stephen, final word.
Prime Minister, I love the wellbeing agenda. That's exactly what we need to be doing as a nation, but we need to have partnership regionally and locally in that. The government has the power to be able to incentivise that behaviour. You've already done your provincial growth fund, turn that into a regional growth fund, encourage regions to get together and talk with you as a government and with business and with iwi to decide how we grow the regions, because that's where the natural talent, capability and assets is. We need to leverage that.
Well, look, on that note, we've run out of time, but thank you very much to all of our panellists. I mean, I think what's come through very clearly to me is that there are exciting possibilities here, and there are actually really good examples of I guess, the transformation pathway that we need to get to grips with and adopt. So could I please ask the audience to join me in thanking our panellists. And thank you very much for your time today, and nahi mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Kia ora.